Didn't mean to scare you.
The only thing that scares me, Mr. O'Connell, are your manners.
Treasure brought them together.
Oh my God.
This may be the Book of the Dead.
Danger kept them close.
This just keeps getting better and better.
Now, all that can come between them
If he turns me into a mummy, you're the first one I'm coming after.
is a curse 3,000 years in the making.
We are in serious trouble.
The Mummy, rated PG-13.
Hey everyone, Brian the Brain here, and this is the last episode in our monthly exploration of Brendan Fraser and his roles in the 1990s. And this week it's 1999's The Mummy, and I'm very excited to review this movie because I think it's an American classic, and I can't wait to break it down. My co-host for this week is Jerome. You can find him on Twitter at JeromeC1985. And we appreciate the 4 or 5 star reviews you gave us here. And this week is a big review for me because I watched this movie so many times when it first came out. I think I even watched it in history class a little bit because it tied in with some history a little bit, despite the loose historical continuity and accuracy of this movie. Brendan Fraser is the star of this movie as Rick O'Connell, along with Rachel Weisz. And this movie, I think, is a classic, and it's directed by Stephen Sommers. And, I can't believe how many times I've seen this movie. I don't know, it's got to be in the 20s or 30s by now. In the last 30 years I've seen this movie, 20 years, whatever. But, I didn't even see it in theaters. I watched it at a friend's house, and then I just rented it, and then it was on TV. And the hype was huge for the sequel in 2001, and I was all about that hype train. But this movie just feels like a timeless classic, and I think it's because it takes place in the 1930s, it looks like, kind of like the original did, and just the flashbacks, and with everything going for it, it just has this timeless feel because it's got this, this great chemistry that the cast has, and I think everything tied together with the sets, the costumes, the whole Lawrence of Arabia feel. I think this is an American classic. Jerome, am I wrong?
I'm not quite sure if I would go with classic. I would probably come right up to the line, but I do want to correct you. Also, we start in 1290 BC, we go to 1923, and then we go into 1926. The next movie, The Mummy Returns, is actually the one that takes place in the 1930s. So I just wanted to correct you on that. I really like this movie a lot. I think there's a lot of really enjoyable aspects to it. I think the thing that you come to realize, especially once the movie gets going, is this is a three-hander. And I know there are other characters, but for me, this is about Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, and John Hannah. Those are the three most important characters. They're around each other quite a bit for most of the movie, and the chemistry between those three just works out really well. And, Jonathan's kind of this cowardly person. Rick O'Connell is our swashbuckling hero. Evelyn is the uptight woman who only loosens up when she gets drunk and is horny, clearly. And those vibes, I think, work out really well for this movie. I think there are also some problematic things that make me hesitate to call this a classic. But Brian, should I give my hot take right now?
Right off the bat, why not?
Imhotep is not the villain of this movie. The Americans, and to an extent, even our protagonists, they are much more so the villains.
Possibly. Maybe Rachel Weisz is the only innocent one, even though she does unleash Imhotep by reading from the Book of the Dead when she wasn't supposed to. I don't know.
The issue is that they're all the colonizers. Like, regardless of, the Americans are pretty awful. Let's be clear about that. They're the worst. But in terms of colonizing, they're all doing it. They're all trying to take property from a brown country, and that's something the British especially have quite a reputation for doing, even though the Americans do it to an extent as well. So, I think that's kind of where I'm at with this movie. And again, I want to point out that I still do enjoy this movie a great deal, but there are those elements to it, but much more so. Imhotep really, yes, he does bad things when he comes back, but before his actual death, are we sure he's bad? Because I don't think he's necessarily bad. And yes, I know he kills the Pharaoh, but the Pharaoh is controlling his girlfriend and basically saying that she can't even look or touch another person. And that's wrong. And I'm not going to say it's totally justified, but I don't think it necessarily makes Imhotep a villain, and that's my stance on this movie.
Listen, I get you. I've had this thought too, but just something about killing the pharaoh and just trying to make it a setup. That's the part where that kind of rubs me the wrong way. If they were killing the pharaoh in the name of the people or something, then that would have been like, conquering a tyrant kind of thing. But it was just a straight up murder. You know what I mean? Just like a brutal murder. And it was just like right off the bat, this movie always gets me when I see that flashback at the beginning. It's just like, wow, this movie kind of opens up brutally. We don't see the blood or anything, but man, like just the idea of getting slaughtered like that by your ex-lover, I guess at that point, and the dude she's sleeping with, who happens to be the high priest of the country or of Egypt, just craziness, man. So we know it's fake, and we know this is like a fake backstory and all, but still, I think for what they came up with, I think it's very, very like in the vein of like a Shakespeare kind of tragedy, mixed with the horror. So I was digging it. But before all that, I mean, let's face it, this is the remake of the 1932 movie. And, whenever there's a remake involved, usually, I mean, Hammer Horror, like they remade it in 1959. And at that point, I don't think even Universal had remade the original at that point. And it took years for it to develop finally to get this made. Originally, like in the 80s, they were trying to get it together, producers James Jackson, Sean Daniel. And they wanted to update it and make it like a low-budget horror, which was kind of like the thing in the 80s. Like, if you make a low-budget horror, get enough money in the box office, plus the rentals, you're going to make a lot of money on the back end. And that's kind of was their idea. They even got George Romero involved, who wrote a treatment and was attached to direct it, but it just didn't work out. So over the years, it went to Clive Barker, who was going to helm and direct it as well, a very darker version that was set to kind of be almost like a Hellraiser type, with dark sexual mysticism going on and, something about an Egyptian tomb in Beverly Hills. And you can kind of picture that with a Clive Barker for sure. But I don't think that fits what Universal wants, because Universal is very much still like looking for that family dollar. In this movie, they were looking for that family dollar, because if you make it too dark, you're going to alienate a part of your audience. It wouldn't have grossed the amount of money that it made. So I think they switched directions in the right direction. They kind of wanted this Indiana Jones, Lawrence of Arabia type feel. And, they hired Kevin Jayne in 96 to write the screenplay, and they kind of adapted this new version. And, they mentioned like Indiana Jones and Jason and the Argonauts, which I love, as like inspirations for this movie. And you can kind of clearly see that. And they wanted, Rick O'Connell to be this kind of swashbuckler, like an Errol Flynn type. So, they offered it to Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck. I've even heard rumors that DiCaprio really wanted the role, but he was doing The Beach at the time, and he tried to do both, and then the producers of The Beach wouldn't let him do it. So that would have been interesting, because I think the movie would have even been better with DiCaprio, but there's something about Brendan Fraser in this movie. Whenever he takes command, there's something about him, because he's so tall, him taking command of the situation, it just leads to him. I don't know. It kind of exemplifies him as the leading man role in this role so much more, because it's like that adventurer, swashbuckling thing, taking charge of a dark, dire situation, which he does all the time, with a one-liner here and there, and he just kind of takes control. So I think casting Brendan Fraser was a big deal. Not necessarily in terms of the numbers, but in terms of like his size, the way he kind of controls the screen with his stoicism, and the way he kind of channels like Indiana Jones, even though I feel at times he's kind of doing some sort of a Harrison Ford impression, which is fine. But I think he's doing a good job here, and I think his casting was great. And, I was texting Jerome like how this movie reminds me of The Adventures of Robin Hood a lot. And that's, it stars Errol Flynn, and, Stephen Sommers, the director, wanted that feel for the lead role, and he got it out of Brendan Fraser. So I think this casting's great. I think it's one of his best roles, even though he's not saying a lot or doing a lot, and he didn't get an Oscar nomination or anything like that. But I think he's better here than, Encino Man, which a lot of people like him in Encino Man. And this is right off of George of the Jungle, where he's acting like an idiot, but still is like a lovable idiot that the audience likes. But over the years, I mean, you can say The Whale, obviously, but I think this might be my favorite role of Brendan Fraser.
Look, I think The Whale is awful, and there's a very good reason that we are not actually talking about the movie he won an Academy Award for, because the movie is really, really bad. I mean, with Michelle Yeoh, we could have done a podcast about Everything Everywhere All at Once, but the problem is that movie's been kind of talked to death, and I don't necessarily want to rehash. I mean, a lot of the conversation would be very similar to the things that everybody else has said. So, that's why we didn't do that. But with The Whale, it's also very specific. The movie's bad. This movie is good, and it's good for a couple of reasons. It's good because of the chemistry between the characters. Brendan Fraser, absolutely the right choice for this movie. I get the Tom Cruise thing. You want a big star. I just don't know that Tom Cruise and Leonardo DiCaprio would they have the willingness to be dumb? Because the thing about Rick O'Connell is that he's not smart. He is determined. He's brave, but he's not very smart. And I always come back to, he reminds me a lot of a dumber Han Solo. I think that is the closest, I think, from a visual standpoint. You kind of see it with his dress. I think you see it with the way he runs and with some of the shooting. Like that's how he comes across to me. Like, it would not surprise me if some of the inspiration for the relationship between Rick and Evie was based on Han Solo and Princess Leia. And I mean, even the brother could be like a C-3PO in some ways. But I think this works out. It works out tremendously well. I think the chemistry is there. Like, for me, this is a situation where if Indiana Jones was too nuanced and complicated for you, then The Mummy is going to work really well, because in a lot of ways, even with those horror elements, this is an even simpler version of the Indiana Jones series. Not to mention the fact, and this kind of falls in line with something like National Treasure, which is also playing in some of the same territory.
Yeah, and I would say this is Indiana Jones meets Universal Horror, and it's that kind of perfect balance because, I've seen that Hammer horror version, and they kind of try to do a darker take on that from even in 1959, and it's not nearly as dark as that. You know what I mean? Even though it has that brutal element at the beginning, and there are some brutal kind of kills in this movie. Yeah, I don't think it's nearly as the dark turn as 1959. I think it's that perfect balance, and I think that's what it needed to be for this new kind of generation. And I think that's why it has this timeless kind of feel to it. I feel like even when I watched it in 99, 2009, when I watched it like in 2015, I remember watching it like at a marathon. And then, I watched it recently again. It's just like, it feels like you can watch this at any time and it feels timeless. It's one of those timeless movies. Probably because, again, it takes place in the 20s, and it's just, you can kind of just feel like nostalgia, all over the place. And then, just taking you back and then looking at the 20s and all that kind of thing. So, again, this movie made so much money, 416 million worldwide, which is what, 650, it's almost 700 a day. And with a budget of 80 million, you know what I mean? Like, that's great. That's fantastic. And according to Stephen Sommers, the next day, like after the day, I guess after the Friday premiere, or the numbers came in after the Friday, and he got a phone call from Universal. He said, "Hey, we're going to ask you to do this again. Can you do it again?" So they, I guess, immediately went into production because in 2001, the next one came out. But yeah, just crazy. I think Stephen Sommers, because we're going to talk about him again. Like, he's got an interesting career. When we're going to do, when I host Creature Feature Month coming up in September, we're going to review Deep Rising, and that was a movie that came out before this that had a lot of a big of a cult status, I think it has nowadays. So we'll talk about that. But he's got an interesting career. But Jerome, I want to ask you: have you ever seen the movie Life Force, or have you even heard of it?
I never heard of this movie until I read about it in the notes that you sent.
Okay, so a quick kind of plot about it. It's basically a vampire movie in space that gets back down to Earth. And it's really, really messed up. And it's got Patrick Stewart in it and a variety of different character actors. But it's an interesting horror movie, to say the least. I've seen parts and bits of it. It's hard to sit through because it's kind of disturbing at a lot of points. But I noticed that, when Imhotep is like sucking away like the bodies, the victims, and taking their parts or whatever, I noticed it looked very similar to the way that the vampires in Life Force suck the life out of their victims. And wouldn't you know it, they use the same freaking body like skeletons from the movie, and they just reused them, man. So I was just like, whoa, no wonder. Like, my brain was like right on that, like just seeing those faces, those sucked, those life forces being sucked out of the body, seeing that face. And I recognized it. I was like, God, that's just like Life Force. So wouldn't you know it, it's the same body. So I guess my brain just works that way, and it's amazing that I was able to put that together even before reading this trivia note about it. So that's a cool little trivia about the movie. And let's kind of get into it. We already talked about the opening in Egypt in 1290 BC. The high priest, excuse me, Imhotep is having an affair with Anck-su-namun, and they get caught. And the pharaoh, is like, "What are you doing?" And then before he says anything, they kill him, and Imhotep escapes. But unfortunately, Anck-su-namun gets killed. And just like I believe in the 1932 version as well as the 1959 version, not the Tom Cruise version at all, which is completely different. But they try to resurrect her, and that's where he gets caught. And that's kind of like the sin, is you can't resurrect her. There's something. It's more about resurrecting the dead more so than it just being about her, because he's in love with her, and that's kind of like the ultimate sin kind of thing. And then he gets buried alive, and that happens in all three, like the 32, the 59, and the 99, which I like that kind of nod to each one. Of course, he gets buried alive, and thousands of years later, or hundreds of years later actually, we get the French Foreign Legion. I guess this is during, I don't know, I want to say, what war would this be?
I'm not sure, but this is very clearly in 1923.
Okay, so it's kind of doing this Lawrence of Arabia type vibe as well. And, after the battle, Rick O'Connell's left alone. And basically, we realize that it's the city of the dead and that it's haunted and that he's kind of been, I guess he's alone there for a few years. And then we cut to years later, and we see Evelyn in the library and Jerome. Every time I see this scene in the library, I'm blown away each time because it's real. And I'm talking about the scene where she accidentally knocks over one bookcase, and it's kind of just knocks over all of them like a domino effect. And it's just this amazing thing. And I kept wondering, like, how many cuts did that take? And I read that they only had one to do it, and they did it in one take. And because, to do a whole setup for that thing would be a whole day, and it wouldn't be worth it. And I kept thinking about this Jackie Chan interview where he kept saying, if you really want to get it done, you have to be patient and get the take, no matter how many takes it takes. In this case, it was one, and you only have one shot, and they got it done right. I can't imagine if this fucked up so bad that they just forgot the shot, and they would have just not done the shot. I think in a different universe, if we talk about the multiverse, there's a version of this movie without it. But I'm so glad that they were able to do it, because to me, it's one of those like impressive things, even to this day, because there's no CGI. It's all realistic bookcases, and I know you're always blown away by it, Jerome.
I think this is the scene that actually gets more impressive the more I see it, because in today's age, they would just use CGI, and it wouldn't look nearly as cool. It's a complete goofy throwaway moment, but I think it adds so much to our understanding of who Evie is as a character, that she loves libraries a lot, but that she is also kind of a mess up. And I think that's one of the coolest attributes of Evie, is that, she's an interesting person, and just the way that it's executed, there's a little bit of physical comedy on her part. Now, obviously, there's a lot of pressure on her to get it right, but once she gets the initial push, it's really about gravity. Like, you're fighting against gravity. Obviously, the camera people also have to do their jobs as well, but I would presume that there's multiple camera people shooting this just as a backup. But again, the main culprit, if this messed up, would have actually been gravity. And I think just like when you watch a ladder match in wrestling, like, so much of whether a ladder match is good is whether the ladder is cooperating with the wrestlers. And in this case, they were very lucky that the bookcases cooperated with gravity and with the rules of thermodynamics. So very good stuff. We probably spent more time on this scene than we should have, but it speaks to the character and the tangible feelings. This is a movie that is like right on the edge of, we are going to have like a lot of CGI. We're going to over-rely on CGI. If you watch the sequel, I would say the sequel over-relies on CGI to its detriment. And I think you really feel the issues more so. And there is some CGI here, but I think it's very well balanced.
Yeah, I would say that. My only criticism of that would be, I think, because at the end we saw like practical life like mummies, it was just so weird because we just saw like a whole CGI Imhotep. So I don't know, because I think if they went with Imhotep as being practical in the suit or whatever with the wrap and everything, it would have got like a darker kind of feel. I think the CGI helps alleviates some of that horror element to it and kind of makes it more family friendly, if that makes sense. Because I don't know, because if you put him in that suit and you have him talk like that, it would just become a darker kind of vibe. So the route they took with that was pretty good. I like that they still were able to maintain, practical mummies at the end for his guards or whatever. So at least they kept that balance, and I like that balance that they kept. So as the story continues, we find out that Jonathan comes in, the brother, and basically he stole this. It's some kind of box, but they find it later. It's a key to open up the Book of the Dead. But he stole it off of Rick O'Connell. Rick O'Connell's now in prison, about to be hanged, and I guess he nearly died filming this scene apparently. And they were actually hanging him, and they cut a little too late apparently on the take. But luckily he survived it in real life. But so he's surviving, and then he's like, "I could take you there. Just get me out of here." So she pays the warden or whatever, and the warden has this, tags along with the journey as well because he's part of the investment now, and he was getting a part of the cut of whatever they find in the city of the dead. So they're off on their adventure, and they're on this boat, and they meet Benny, who we saw in the beginning of the movie, who abandoned O'Connell in the battle, and he's the comic practical relief. And I was texting Jerome, and this is kind of like, when Hulk Hogan would beat up Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Heenan would kind of be a swarm, swarming his way out no matter what he would say or do, like, "Please don't do this, I'll do anything," blah blah blah. And that's Benny, and he's just gonna say or do whatever just to get away or get alive or get money, and that's Benny's character. And to this day, I didn't know what race he was until I watched this movie for the first time with subtitles, and apparently he's speaking Hungarian. So my guess is that he's Hungarian, which would make sense, and that he can kind of just adapts all these different cultures around that he goes to, because he's got the different talismans for each culture, and we see that later on. So he's kind of this kind of chameleon type, you know what I mean? So that's kind of why I never figured out where he was from until I guess recently. So credit to him, Benny, Kevin J. O'Connor, the actor. I think he did a great job doing, like, I don't know if he's doing all the stunts himself, but man, he was taking a lot of bumps in this movie. From the bump on the on the boat, there's bumps in the city of the dead. There's bumps in the hotel. He gets a chair thrown at him at the hotel. A lot of physical stuff for this guy, and he was just taking it. And I don't know if it was him and the stunt guy or whatever, but credit to him, because this was very much a physical performance on his part, and I think it paid off because he's one of the more memorable characters of the movie, and we just remember him getting beat up the whole time. So I think it just works in that regard. And then, we get the Magi as well, and they're trying to prevent the resurrection of Imhotep. So they sneak on board, and you think they're pirates or something, and they burn the boat down. But then, it gets separated with the two groups. Benny's group that he's leading of Americans that are just kind of like, explorers for fun. They're just kind of there because, with their guns, blazing. I think this is where Jerome kind of comes in. He's like, I don't think he likes those guys. I don't like those guys either. They're very, those colonizer types, and just using the people around them as slaves and servants or servant types or whatever. But, they do find the book, and they're the ones that get eaten up by Imhotep. But I think you really hate these guys more than I do.
I mean, they're pretty terrible. They're the very typical Americans, I guess you could say, and they're very much into that. And I think the movie is playing with this idea of stereotyping the Americans. And they stereotype, unfortunately, some of the Arabs as well. And yeah, this is a very simplistic movie in a lot of ways, and I think some of that benefits it, but I think in some cases, it is problematic. But again, I think the fun of this movie is just watching the various interactions. If you're coming to this movie for plot, then I don't know what you're doing, because this is not a movie about plot. This is a movie about one-liners and shenanigans and some of the horror imagery, which I think is very good, because there are a number of practical elements that really make this work out well. So I think that's kind of where I come down on this movie in so many cases, is that I think there's a lot of really good elements, but if you're just focusing and you're reading the Wikipedia plot summary, you're not getting everything that this movie has to offer, because this, again, is so much about Rick and Evelyn's, Evie's, like, their romance, and how that slowly develops over the course of 2 hours, how Jonathan and Evie interact with each other. Jonathan kind of growing up a little bit and becoming less of a coward. Imhotep growing into his powers and becoming a menace as he increases. The role that Oded Fehr plays as Ardith Bey as he kind of leads his group. Oded Fehr, I think, is kind of underrated in these movies, and I think that, you know, Rachel Weisz, Brendan Fraser, like, they've gone on to do other things, but I don't know, man. I always associate Oded Fehr with these two movies because I think he's extremely memorable. He's got that great look and a very deep voice, very good voice as well.
Yeah, we don't even find his name, or we never hear his name until the sequel, which is so weird to me. I never realized it, but his name is Ardith Bey, and we never hear that until the second movie. But I must say, like, he's got a great performance in this movie as well. I think everyone has great, solid performances in this movie. I don't think there's necessarily a bad performance, maybe. But I would say just even his hair, I don't know if it was a wig or whatever, but man, he had amazing hair in this movie. I think it's a wig, but if it's his real hair, credit to him because, wow. You know, that was one of the things that I'm always impressed with in his character is that his wonderful long locks, man. And every once in a while, I'll compliment the hairstyles in a character, and his is just like, man, for living in the desert, he clearly is only using water. He doesn't need conditioner. Maybe that's what we're missing, and we're using too many chemicals in our hair, folks. Maybe that's the answer. I don't know. But moving on. So here's where Evelyn fucks up. And look, I love Evelyn as a character. She's very bookish. She's very smart. And we talked about how she kind of loosens up, kind of almost like Elizabeth Hurley does in Austin Powers 1. But O'Connell doesn't want to take advantage of her, of course, because that's the wrong thing to do. But just she fucks up real bad. And I don't know what inspired her to thinking, okay, maybe I can use this. It's a key. Can I open the Book of the Dead? She steals the Book of the I don't know if it's stealing, but she borrows the Book of the Dead from the group that found it. And she opens it up and it unleashes Imhotep because earlier in the day they found his sarcophagus. So all kinds of shenanigans going on, and she unleashes him, and she's just like, "Okay, we'll just put it back," with no no explanation as to how until she figures out later on that there's a book of life or whatever. But just I don't know what it is, but just something about her being so calm about the situation, and Rick is just like panicking at every turn almost, and he's like shooting first almost because of what's going on, and the mummy's coming back, and just them stalking them. So I don't know. Just I feel bad for Evelyn in this case. Does this make her a villain? I don't know. I'm conflicted because she fucked up real bad, and she just seems kind of like aloof about it. Not aloof, but just like kind of careless and just kind of like not thinking of the consequences of reading from the Book of the Dead, which of course I attribute to the Necronomicon from Evil Dead. I kind of made that joke.
If you ever run into an ancient book that has the word dead in it, or death, or some other form, maybe take it to an expert first, or maybe put it to the side, maybe leave it in the dirt. I would just strongly advise against reading ancient books that talk about death, because you never know, you may resurrect the dead, and that's a really bad thing. And if there's anything that movies should have taught us, it's that if you see an ancient book, don't read it, wait.
Absolutely, and apparently they didn't learn their lesson in Evil Dead Rise either, which just came out this year, and people just don't learn. Do not read from evil books, people. But she does it, and, you know, it unleashes Imhotep, and he hunts down the people, and this is where the life force bodies come in, and it just... I mean, I feel bad for the one guy at first because he steals his eyes and tongue, and I texted Jerome about this. I always feel bad for this guy because this dude... I mean... Why didn't he just kill him initially? You know what I mean? Why did he have to like take his tongue, his eyes, let him live for 12 hours, and then kill him? It's like, come on, man. What a false tease. Like, I'm gonna let you live, and then you lived for 12 hours in agony with no tongue and eyes, and then he dies. It's so fucked up. But what's also fucked up is the other guy, the warden from the prison that was tagging along with O'Connell and them. He unfortunately gets a scarab. An ancient scarab goes into his body, and this is where the body horror part of the movie comes in. It's heebie-jeebies, feelings kind of all over the place. And it goes inside his body, it goes all the way to his brain and drives him nuts, and then the only thing he can consciously do at the moment is ram his head into a freaking wall and kills himself. Just a brutal murder or like brutal kill, and that always stands out to me in this movie, along with the one with the no tongue and the no eyes, and then he kills him 12 hours later. Eventually, Emotep gets all the guys and gets his powers back. But man, just some of these visuals. This is where the horror elements come in, I think, and a lot of these visuals toe that line of going too far, but not too far, because like we see the bodies, but not for too long and from afar. And like one of the bodies is just a shadow. We just see the body deteriorate into like basically the body we see when it's the life sucked out of him, and we see that in the shadows with like some CGI, which worked. Because I think if you show that, I think the audience would freak out. Because like it's pretty brutal. If you watch Life Force, they show it all in Life Force, and if that's based on that, holy shit, that would have made this an R for sure. But yeah, they suck out the bodies, and he's alive, and he kidnaps. This is where he gets the wackiness. I think Jerome would agree with me that why does he have to kidnap Evelyn in order to bring back Nux on the Moon when you already have the Book of the Dead to resurrect people?
I mean, maybe there's special rules. Again, this is not a movie that I think you need to think too hard about, because it's just going to drive you absolutely insane if you really poke at this and pull the strings. I mean, you pull the string and you're going to kind of pull the whole thing down. And I mean, and that's not why you're watching this movie. You're watching it to laugh. You're watching it for those horror elements that definitely earn the PG-13 rating. Like, this is definitely not a movie that you want to show young kids, because there are those horror elements that I think makes it a little scary. And again, there's just enough like realness to the bodies and some of the action that it does earn that rating, and definitely makes you feel like, oh, this is pretty terrifying. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's what I like about movie making, is the fact that I am seeing something that is real and not necessarily something that was just created in a computer. And I understand that logistically you have to do that for certain situations, and there are certainly good examples of CGI, but I think we've lost just not everything has to be CGI, and I think we feel this obligation that we just need to do things on a computer because it's easier, when in a lot of cases with some of the things that are in The Mummy, you do certain things that you have real bodies, or you have real makeup, or things like that, and you enhance it with CGI. That's what actually makes it better, is by having something that's actually there and then using computers to enhance what is already there. That's what makes movie making special, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of where I come down on this. Anything else about the plot?
I mean, it gets wacky at the end. I mean, I mentioned that, or I forgot to mention that, they resurrect like this, the Emotep's guards from the beginning of the movie. So here's where we mix like the CGI mummies mixed with the practical mummies, and this is kind of where I kind of critique it a little bit, because I felt like I wanted more practical mummies, even though like some of the guards were CGI, but then the ones coming out of the ground were real, and every time there was a close-up of a hand or something, that would be real, to kind of blend the two images in your brain. But I don't know, I kind of felt like I wanted more of the practical stuff at the end. You know what I mean? I felt like, give me the guards that were the ones that killed Nux on the Moon. Give me them in real, not CGI. I think that would have been a little more effective. But again, it could be timing. It could be just the amount of cast members you have on set. But, basically they find the book of life, and then they turn Emotep mortal, kill him, and then he lands in this, probably this lake of souls or whatever. Nux on the Moon was resurrected. See, I don't know. See, this is where you start pulling the strings. It falls apart, that Jerome mentioned, because it looks like they never needed to actually sacrifice Evelyn at all or something. I don't know. Very, very weird stuff at the end, but everyone's happy at the end of the day. They even get some gold out of it. Poor Benny is, maybe not poor Benny, but he's left there in the tomb alone with the scarabs, and it's meant to be assumed that he was consumed to the bone by the scarabs. So very gruesome death that we never see, but again, it's that PG-13 rating. Overall, I think this kind of falls into the classic, because I've seen this so many times, and I know so many people have seen this so many times. TV, movie, some people saw it in theaters, and to them it has that similar feel, like this timeless kind of classic feel to it. And I know a lot of my friends and a lot of people have never seen the Adventures of Robin Hood from the 30s, which is one of my favorite version of Robin Hood. but it also has that timeless feel to it where you can watch it in any decade and kind of communicate with that current generation. And I feel like this movie does that as well, even with the one-liners. I mean, throw aside some of the subtle, casual racism and the treatment of the minority characters, but I feel like these characters and the chemistry kind of last throughout time, kind of like the way that the original Star Wars has kind of lasted through time and has kind of connected through all the generations. Maybe it's something similar to that. I don't know, something about that, not necessarily a love triangle, but three characters that you care really, a lot about that are really sticking together, and they're sticking together at the end of the movie. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I loved a lot of the practical effects. Some CGI stuff I would have just switched to practical, but I don't know if that was, just a money decision or a casting decision. But overall, I think it's a classic. But I don't know if you think it's a classic as well.
I want to speak to the score. Gary Goldsmith is an all-timer, but I think the score of this movie really helps it feel as epic as it does. And I think any good piece of music done for this kind of movie, that's where it really gets a lot of its credibility. I mean, I can't imagine watching a Star Wars movie without John Williams. I can't imagine watching this movie without the Jerry Goldsmith score. I think it's pretty great. I think it adds a lot and contributes a lot to it. Brendan Fraser's great. Rachel Weisz is very good. I think Rachel Weisz is actually better in the second movie, even though I think the second movie is kind of weak sauce in certain areas, mostly because they add a kid. But I think she's really good here, and it's great to see her character evolve, I would say, and just a lot of really good performances across the board. Like, nobody really stands out in terms of being bad. So I think that's what you want. I think you need people who are going to add some credibility, who are going to be good, and who are going to take this seriously. I think you get that. You get that in spades here, and also very well paced movie. This movie is almost exactly 2 hours. Those credits hit about that 1:59 2-hour mark, and I think that's perfect. Like, you don't want these movies to be 2.5 hours. Like, every summer movie in 2023 just fucking feels like it's 2.5 hours. It's 2:45. It's 3 hours. And I'm sick of it, man. Like, this movie being 2 hours and 4 minutes is absolutely perfect. And let's bring back the 2 hour, the 1 hour 45 movie, man. That's all I'm saying.
Well, what helps is that with the pacing in this movie, it feels like a 90-minute movie, but it's 2 hours. And I think that's something about not having any quote-unquote rest holds in the movie, because it's not that type of movie that needs it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a Young Bucks match.
Well, you don't have a multiverse to explain. You don't have to explain time travel. You don't have to have a scene in a military room or something like that where you have to explain what's going on. There is exposition going on as they're moving, and that really helps. And again, the plot is pretty simplistic. I mean, it does have some complications, but for the most part, things are explained kind of as they go. And I think that works out so much well, because again, it feels like every movie now just has to explain. Like, every movie has to have Doc Brown pulling out the chalkboard and explain what the hell's going on. And it's making these movies feel obnoxiously long. Not to mention, every movie, especially the sequels, have to have like 1 million characters. You have to throw the nostalgia in there. I'm not saying any names, but yeah, this is not just one movie's problem. This is a problem across the board, I would say.
And there you go. And maybe this is why it's a timeless classic, because it doesn't rely on any of that. Maybe that's what it is. It kind of stands on its own, and you can watch the sequels. And here's where we talk about Michelle Yeoh and the third movie and replacing Rachel Weisz, and how bad of a move that was. How I didn't even watch it in theaters. How unexcited I was. I was working at Blockbuster at the time, and I rented it with a free rental, and I was still regretting renting it. I never want to watch that movie again. I think it's one of Jet Li's worst roles. I hate that movie a lot. I hate to say that I hate a movie, but Mummy 3 really, and I considered reviewing it for this month too, just because of the having Michelle Yeoh in it, and just the background to that movie. And the summer of 07, where it was like every third, like Shrek 3, Mummy 3, Rush Hour 3, Pirates 3, Spider-Man 3, all those came out in 07. And it's just like, oh man. So yeah, we're avoiding that one. We already talked about this sequel with the kids, so
Here's the thing about the third one. I watched the trailer for the third one, and I realized I have zero memory of most of that movie. I was stunned at how little memory I had. I did remember Maria Bello's awful wig. That's one of the few things that I did remember. I mean, this movie it's really terrible. Maybe don't have Rob Cohen direct movies because he's really bad at it. And I mean, it's so bad for a lot of different reasons. Having a grown up Alex, Jet Li having almost nothing to do, Michelle Yeoh having nothing to do. I mean, Brendan Fraser might be the saving grace of that particular film. But yeah, I mean, it's extremely forgettable. And also, while I was looking, of course, the Scorpion King, which would be Dwayne Johnson's first major role, would be spun off of this. Brian, do you realize there are 4 Scorpion King movies?
yeah. And I remember like when they came out when I was working at Blockbuster, looking at the box each time and people renting them, and it would be the usual Tuesday crowd that would just rent whatever comes out on Tuesday, and the usual Tuesday crowd was like, "This one's so bad. It wasn't The Rock wasn't in it though," and that's what I would remember from those reviews of all the knockoff sequels of the Scorpion King.
So it's pretty bad. I looked at a box of the Scorpion King 3 with good old Billy Zane, Ron Perlman, and Batista.
Yeah, it's strange because Billy Zane, to me, is kind of known as the guy who looks like Arnold Vosloo, who played Imhotep. Or maybe vice versa, which
Right.
is so strange because you know that casting director probably thought the same thing and we're just like, fuck it, we can get it. Because Billy Zane, well, I think he still is, taking cheap roles just because I've looked at his IMDb and he's been in some really bad horror movies in the latter years. So he was probably just taking the paycheck. And yeah, wouldn't be surprised if he plays some kind of like cousin to Emotep or something in that movie. I haven't even seen the movie, never read the plot, but I can just guess that based on the casting. But yeah, just a lot of like legacy knockoff sequels to this one movie spun this whole franchise that people don't realize really exists. I feel people just remember Mummy 1, 2, and the Scorpion King. People already forget about 3. An eclectic crowd remembers the Scorpion King because of the DVD rentals back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and that's how they're going to remember it.
I mean, Scorpion King being Rock's first big starring role. Like, yes, he's in Mummy Returns, but he's in that movie for like 5 minutes, so who cares? But I think the reason that movie is memorable is because it's like Dwayne Johnson's first starring role, and I think that does carry some significance to it.
Yeah, and after that, it's just kind of like downhill. Now, I've heard rumors because of what's happened at the Oscars this year's Oscar run, a potential Mummy 4 in the franchise, just because we know the Dark Universe didn't exactly pan out with Tom Cruise, right? So I've heard rumblings from certain people who I follow on Twitter, who are in the industry, who are kind of like, under the radar kind of reporters that kind of get things right a lot of the time. So what I've heard is that there have been talks for a Mummy 4. Who knows if it's true? Brendan Fraser coming back to the role, and I doubt Michelle Yeoh can, but you never know. Something. You never know. But yeah, I think there's potential there if he wants to do it. I mean, he sounds motivated because I read in an article like there was like a screening somewhere in the UK for Mummy 1 and 2 like 2 years ago, and he came out dressed as Rick O'Connell, and the crowd lost it, and he introduced the movies. And if you still do that in 2021, you still got to have a love for the character. You know what I mean? You can't just not do that and not have a love for that character still. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's something to that. I guess we have a grown-up kid. I know how you feel about that kid. I wouldn't say fridge the kid, but I'm just saying he could be an adult now. And, of course, Brendan Fraser's a much matured actor, just winning the Oscar. So I think there's a lot of potential there. I don't know if you get, Stephen Sommers back necessarily, but someone who can kind of ground it a little bit, kind of bring back the franchise to the heights it had, maybe. I don't know. But, yeah, because I think by the time you get to the third one, everything is just kind of thrown out the window with CGI. But that's kind of my feelings on it. 8 out of 10, and, my weaknesses are like the plot and, the minority characters getting shortchanged, so to speak. And then, of course, I kind of criticize the mummies and the use of practical mummies at certain times versus the CGI mummy. But I still say that making the main Imhotep mummy CGI is probably the safer bet to make audiences comfortable and not kind of feel like they're backdoored into like an R-rated movie they weren't signing up for, kind of thing. So, My MVP is Steven Summers, and your MVP is still sticking with the writer, so it should be the same, right?
It is Steven Summers, and the other screen story credit is Lloyd Fonville, Kevin Jari, John Balderston, who wrote the 1932 screenplay. Those are the folks that I am regarding as the MVP in honor of the writers' strike. And I think we disagree on best performance.
See, here's the thing. I know I mentioned this is like my favorite Brendan Fraser role, but even still, I still think Rachel Weisz kind of outdoes him a little bit because I think she has the better arc. Like, we see her at the beginning as the bookish kind of girl. We kind of see her break out a little bit, and then she kind of does save the day at the end, reading the actual passage, despite her being the one that unleashed the mummy.
Yeah,
But
you can't give her credit for solving the problem when she created it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, she did read the right passage at the right time, and, she was smart enough to do it. She was smart enough to find the book of life when I guess it's been in this museum this whole time, and none of the scholars figured out how to translate it properly until that exact moment where Brendan Fraser delivers one of the best lines in the movie that I always remember, and where she goes, "Patience is a virtue," and he goes, "Not right now, it isn't," and I always remember that line. But I'm going with Rachel Weisz, and I feel like this was the start of her, growth. I know there was like another movie she did before this, where it's kind of. It's after this. It's Beautiful Creatures. Filmed around the same time, but in Beautiful Creatures, that's a much different role of what this is. And I feel like, she was just tapping into what she can potentially become. And the start of this, like her growth of her career kind of starts here. And I would definitely check out Beautiful Creatures as well. I haven't seen that one in a long time, but I remember she's great in that as well. So that's my pick.
All right, so I think we're good to go with Brendan Fraser Month. I would give this about a 7.5. I think I'm a little cooler on the plot than you, but I think there's still a lot of really good stuff. High recommendation. And as of right now, we can find this on Peacock. And who knows? Maybe there'll be another one forthcoming. But Brian, I'm very excited for next month.
Yeah, we're kind of doing something a little different. We've been talking about doing something similar to this for a while. We're going to rank movie franchises. Now, we're not going to rank franchises against other franchises. We're ranking the movies within the franchise. So we're going to start out with Die Hard, followed by the Fast franchise, the Mission Impossible franchise, and I'm already missing one off the top of my head, but we're definitely starting out with Die Hard next week. And what's the other one I'm forgetting?
So we are going to be doing Die Hard in the first Tuesday of August. We are going to be doing Rocky Creed in week 2. Week 3, we will be doing Fast and the Furious. Week 4, we will be doing Mission Impossible. There is a 5th Tuesday in August. We will not be ranking franchises in that week, but we are going to do something else very special that we will announce during our Mission Impossible episode.
Yeah, so that means we got some homework to do and some... because I got some catching up to do as well in the Mission Impossible franchise and the Fast franchise, but I'm definitely caught up on Die Hard, Creed, and Rocky, so we'll be ready to go for those. And I guess my love for Die Hard 3 is not shared as much as most people, and Jerome is not one of those people, apparently, so it's going to be interesting next week, because I definitely have my feelings about Die Hard 2 and how much I despise that movie, so it's going to be an interesting conversation next week for sure. I'm Brian the Brain. My co-host is Jerome, and thank you for listening. We'll talk again next week.